Hey folks, it's Tom here. I'm part of the team at Frogandcrow events that you guys have been attending this weekend with the Dakar Rally. What we're doing today is we're just going to throw together a quick painting demo on some of the stuff that I've been working on in the past. Some of you have been doing lessons with me throughout the day, and one of the questions I commonly get asked about the stuff that I work on is how I do my freehand on a lot of my models. My own personal Space Marine chapter, the Stormcrows, are absolutely covered in things like war paint and little details on the cloth and certain blankets that are on the tanks and things. So we thought we'd just knock together a quick video to show you how it's done, because it's surprisingly simple when you know what you're doing. It's all about learning where to add and subtract paint. Okay, so to give you an idea of what we're talking about, this is a finished Stormcrow right here. And the bit that we're going to be showing you about today is this tabard just here and the freehand work that's on there. Okay. So when it comes to a starting place for a model like this, you've got to think about how you're going to build up these layers. So if I'll just pick that guy back up again. For me, the bottom layer of this model is this bone area just here. Okay. And we're going to build up from that. So the best place to start is with a nice neutral bone colour, like I've got here. Now I'm using the Tooth and Coats range of paint, and the one I'm using right now is Dragon Fang, which is this one. Okay, so straight onto the palette, got some ready just here, and we're just going to get that consistency right down from where it comes out the pot until it starts flowing nicely across the palette. So this is the kind of consistency you want when you start painting like this, because we're going to be using a lot of layers over quite a small area, and we want to make sure that as we add paint, we're not losing any detail. So it's just going to go over nice and smooth. The more I add of this, you can see it running on the model there, and it might pull up slightly, but we're just going to drag it to where we need to be. Okay, so once we're starting from this nice warm color, we have to think about the next layer. Okay, so the next bit of the model, as we start building things up, are these red blocks just here. Okay. Now these shapes at first can look like quite a complicated pattern to put in, but they're remarkably simple when you figure out where you're going to be adding and removing paint from. So what we're going to start doing is we're going to start just by painting red rectangles throughout this tabard. And again, keeping that paint nice and thin so we can go over as needed. Now, the red that we're using here is Sanguine Scarlet, again from the Tooth and Coats range, which is quite a nice deep red, but over this bone colour is going to show quite nicely and become quite bold. And again, we're just going to start getting these rectangles painted in. Now, they don't have to be perfect. A lot of painters do try and get everything right the first time, but truth be told, that's not me. I will make a lot of mistakes while making a model, and the reason I keep my paint so thin is so that I can go back and fix it time and time again. Okay, so to save you guys watching me paint rectangles for the next little while, I've already got one done. Okay, so once you've got these rectangles done, you'll both see they're quite rough in some places, but it's fine because we're going to be taking some paint away here. Okay. Now, when we're taking paint away, we're going to start thinking of those layers again and what's underneath the colour that we've just put on top. So in this case, it's that Dragon Fang that we saw earlier, and we're going to start cutting into these to make these patterns. Okay. Again, add a bit more water, keep that consistency nice and thin, because we might need to correct a good bit of this. Okay. So when it comes to making these little cuts into the red, we're just going to start straight off by trying to get a triangle in these corners on the sides and on the other side. And we're going to leave a column of red sticking down from the center. Okay. So once we've got those nice and sharp, it's probably going to take 2 or 3 coats to get a color like bone over the top of a very bold colour like red, like this. So again, keeping that paint nice and thin until we've got them. Now, if you like I've done here, just bulging into that red. Don't worry about it. We're going to fix that shortly. And this center one, we're almost going to paint a little X to make sure we get a nice cross section where these corners meet. Now, one of the things that I always try and do in my freehand is I try and keep the lines as straight as possible. As soon as you start doing things like curves and circles, it adds room for error. Okay, and I won't lie, I'm not the best when it comes to those curved angles, so I try and keep to straight lines only. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to go back with the red now, going back to the layer above the bone to just start sharpening up these edges. Okay. Because once we've got that basic shape in, the rest will follow. Now, the nice thing about these particular models, so these are the Black Templar Crusader models that I use for these, is they've got loads of details that help hide a lot of the work that you're going to need to do. Okay. In the breastplate here, I now no longer need to paint the top half of this rectangle. Where the belt is, I no longer need to paint the bottom half of this one. So I'm going to try and use the model to my advantage to make it seem like it's got a bit more effort in it than it actually has. Okay, so I'm just going to start this second one off here. And again, because we've got this belt that we're working around, we can be a little bit rougher because the folds in the cloth will hide a lot of mistakes. You know, the model's going to do the work for us. And again, just neaten that up with a little bit of red. Now, this part of the painting process is possibly the longest. So what we'll do is we'll come back in just a minute when I've got the rest of this tabard sorted out, and we'll start looking at the rest of the layers that we need to think of. Cool. So now that we've got this stage done, we're going to be looking at the next layer as we build these colours up. Okay. So we've got the basic patterning in here by just cutting those little triangles into the red all the way down. And thankfully, belt, breastplate, they're hiding a lot of the work that we would have otherwise had to do. So the next stage up on the completed models is a small blue diamond in the center of these red patterns. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to be using the Elysium blue. Okay, nice mid-tone blue there to start building it up. So, and again, it's all about being a little bit rough and fixing your mistakes afterwards. Okay, so to do this, we're going to be just finding an area towards the center of this red and putting a little blob of blue. Okay, then we're going to then go back and neaten up all the way down. Some bits we don't need, like here, thanks to that big fat belt buckle. And down the bottom there, it's being cut off by the bottom of the tabard. Okay. I'm just being super rough with it. I'm going to soak up a little bit of excess paint that I got up top here. And then I'm going to start cutting these into diamonds. Okay. And we're going to go to the layer beneath the blue, in this case, the red. And I'm going to start working with sort of parallel lines. So as we're cutting into these diamonds, I'm going to do all the sides that would be coming down on this angle here. Just to try and keep that angle consistent. And when it comes to doing stuff like this, you want to be moving the point of that brush towards your solar plexus. It'll help keep that straight. So you're making the model work for you, not you work for the model. Okay, if you need to switch it around, alter the angle, then flip the model around. Okay, it's much better that you keep that brush straight than you keep trying to bend and move into the model. Okay, and now on that opposite parallel, I'm going to start just cutting those lines in to these diamonds. Okay, nice and easy. Okay, so what this blue's done is added a nice little cold colour into the middle of all these warm colours, just to try and get a little bit of attention in there and draw the eye. So to take that back, the final layer that we're building up is going to be a small dot of yellow within the blue. Okay, I'll just add a little point of interest in there. So for that, we're going to be using Skulky Yellow from here. And in this case, we don't need to be as neat as we have done. Well, neat, relative term. But we certainly don't need to worry about neatening it up afterwards. Okay, all we're aiming to do is get a little bit of yellow in the center of these. And if they're slightly off, we can always go back and fix it if we need to. Okay. So in this case, I'm just going to get a little bit of blue and just take away a little bit here and a little bit there. Okay, and because we're working in these layers, if we mess up the blue, like we just did, we can grab a little bit of red and just straighten that edge up there as well. Okay. So now we've got the bulk of the tabard done. We've got all this patterning down the center. It's done and dusted now. We don't need to highlight any of this because the folds and the curves of the tabard, when we wash it later, are going to do all that work for us. Okay. So now, rather than thinking about layering up, we're going to start layering out. So if I just quickly grab the finished Stormcrow here, we're going to work out with this bone, black, bone, red. Okay, so we're just going to start with this black, which is going to start adding a border or a frame to the model that's going to contain that central pattern. Okay. Okay, so going through this, the black that we're going to be using is this Doom Death black. And we're going to start getting these lines done. Now, we want this a little bit thinner than the rest because black being quite a bold colour, if we make a mistake here, it can be quite difficult or can certainly require a good number of layers to get that neatened up. Okay. And all we're trying to do is we're going to break the model into 3 parts so we can focus on each part individually. This top bit, this bit between the belts, and then the bottom area here. Okay. And all we want to do is just leave enough bone to show between the black and the red just here. Okay. And this bit's usually nice and quick. And if you do it with a thin enough black paint, you can always go back over it to make it a little bit bolder if you're not happy with how it looks after the first try. But what's more important in that first try is trying to get those lines consistent and trying to keep that border neat. Okay. And the nice thing is I always do the tabards first on these models. And what it means I can do is I can actually just paint over the unpainted areas. So I can try and keep these lines consistent. So in this area here, I'm just going to skip straight over the belt with a bit of black to keep that line flowing with the tabard. And it's going to let me know where I'm going to join up with it down here. Okay. I'm just going to skip straight over this. There's this little bit of knee pad, same thing. Just skip straight over it so you know where you're going to join it in this bottom region. Okay. Again, if we sort of have this imaginary line running down the side of this belt here, we know that we're going to join up roughly here to the tabard. We can get this top line down towards where the knee joins the tabard here. And again, moving the model to our advantage, we're going to start bringing that line up just here, aiming towards this crease. Okay. So there's a few bits here where the line's gone a little bit squiggly, a little bit lumpy. So we're going to go to the layer beneath, this bone colour again. And we're just going to neaten them up super quick. And try and just get a little bit more consistency on that line. Make it a little bit straighter. Now, a nice thing about working with things like tabards or cloth is that it is usually, in some cases, a natural material. So if it looks a little bit rough, that's absolutely fine. It's just going to add to that. If you're trying to get a more machine stamped or machine made looking piece of cloth, then you'll want it as neat as possible. But I sort of prefer to go for this sort of homespun idea for these tabards where they've been individually crafted by the marine that's wearing them. Okay, so we've got these black lines done now, all the way down, and we're just going to add that final border colour of the red. So moving back to that scarlet, little bit more water, make sure that's nice and thin, flowing nicely. We're just going to leave that little bit of bone between the black and the red. And again, working it in the 3 sections that we mentioned before for the black. Okay. Scoot around the side of this tabard, make sure we've got all that cloth done. This little section here. And again, if we get a little bit rough, it's absolutely fine, because we can always neaten it up because we've thinned our paints down nicely to get a nice thin coat that's not going to lose us any detail. Now, if you're looking for a consistent thickness on the tabard for this red area, it's going to be quite hard because the tabards flare out. So down towards the bottom of the tabard, there's going to be a thicker red line than there is at the top. What's important, though, is the consistency of the distance between that red, the bone, and so the black bone and the red again. Okay, that's what's going to make it look neater. Again, if we get a bit of this red on that white armor, it doesn't matter, because this is all going to get painted, in my case, orange, after this is done. Again, just in here. Okay, and just catching the back of the tabard here. The backs of the tabards I always just paint red. A little bit of laziness, because the people aren't tend to go and looking in between the legs of the back of the model, so you don't really need to worry about trying to make that as consistent as the front. So I just tend to go as a nice block red. Okay, so we've got those red blocks in, and now I'm just going to go back with that bone and make sure that we've got these lines as neat as possible. Again, removing red where necessary. All the way up. And once again, if we get too much of the bone colour on and remove a little bit too much red, like I have done at the bottom of this tabard, we can just add more red. Okay, so we're almost there now. Just a little bit to go. So now we're actually going to add a highlight to the model for the first time. And all we're going to do is we're going to catch the edge of the tabards here where the red meets the corner. Okay. We don't need to worry about areas that are going to be in shadow around here, because the shade that we're going to add shortly is going to add those shadows and highlights naturally. It's areas like the corners here, very small areas that are going to catch the sunlight naturally. Okay. So for this, we're using Demon Red. Okay, it's just the next stage up from that Sanguine Scarlet. And using the side of the brush rather than the tip, is going to scrape it pretty much along the side of this tabard, just to add that highlight in a nice sharp line, just running down there. Okay, so one final thing to do, and that's just to add those shadows and natural highlights that we've been talking about. Okay, so for that, I'm going to use Battle Blood Wash. We're going to add some to the palette, straight from the bottle, but we actually want to thin it down quite a bit, because we don't want to lose all those details that we've just painstakingly put into the model. So we're going to get it nice and thin. Okay, until we're about there. And as we apply it to the model, I tend to pop it on quite thick and just get a nice decent coverage to start with. And once that's all on there, I can concentrate, pardon me, on moving it about. Okay, because this will be wet for a good little while. So as we've got this first coat on, we'll see that it's pooling in areas like this. Okay, and while these are going to be deeper recesses, we don't want it to obscure from the detail. So we can just move our brush down, keeping the shade in there, and just using the brush to soak up any excess that we don't want. Okay. Okay. So that's it for the most part. What we can then do is we can then refine those shadows and these edges. So if I just quickly pop him down, and I'll grab a tabard that I did earlier on. And now we're going to add some more shade to areas such as underneath this breastplate, these belts, just to accentuate those shadows. And this, we're just going to take that wash straight from the pot and just carefully apply it to these areas which might have more shadow throughout them. Okay. And that is that. So by the time you finish the entire model, you'll have this where the colours then get broken up a lot more with things like the belts and the colours that you're going to be using for the armour. Okay. So any of those mistakes that we made, those lines that we drew over the belts, over the knee pads, etc., they're going to be covered up by what you paint next onto the model. And that is how I do the tabards for my Stormcrows. It's all about thinking about those layers and building up and building out, and how you can keep your paint thin and consistent enough to keep adding and subtracting as necessary. Okay. It's certainly not about getting it right the first time. It's about learning how to fix those mistakes and those slip-ups. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope you take something away from this little lesson here. I just want to say a quick thank you to the Velocity Media Group, who've helped Frog and Crow put this video together, and who will be doing all the videography for the Dakar Rally this weekend. I hope you're enjoying the event. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you've got any questions and you see me knocking about, please do come up and ask. Okay. See you around, guys.